Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Trek Talk, where I review and discuss an episode of the original Star Trek series. This week, taking a look at The Naked Time, the sixth episode that was filmed for the series. I am going in production order here. And I'll again be reading from Mark Cushman's book. These are the voyages for behind the scenes information on the production of this episode. This is really one of the most memorable episodes with some truly iconic moments. And it's one of the first episodes that really gives us a glimpse into the inner lives of the crew and what makes them who they are, their foibles and their flaws and such. So I'm just going to go ahead and get right into it. So we'll look at the book here. So this is from an NBC press release on September 1st, 1966. The spaceship USS Enterprise faces imminent destruction when a strange sickness incapacitates the crew in The Naked Time on Star Trek, Tuesday, September 29th, NBC Television Network Colorcast. Sorry about that. Co-starring regulars William Shatner as Captain Kirk and Leonard Nimoy as Mr. Spock. A landing party returns to the Enterprise from another planet, unaware that they are bringing aboard a disease with which they have been contaminated and which soon spreads throughout the crew. As Dr. McCoy frantically seeks an antidote to stem the epidemic, the crew verges on mutiny while virtually paralyzing the huge craft. And Cushman further writes to compound the situation, due to an act of sabotage carried out by Lieutenant Kevin Riley, the ship is being pulled toward an unstable Arctic world and inescapable destruction. The theme tells us that we are not alone with our particular neuroses and that all humans repress certain dark emotions, often a damaged side that we dare not show. We are in good company as we witness the principal Star Trek characters stripped bare and revealed with their inside out. There is no monster in this story, or is there? This clap this classic episode begins on a series of bad notes. The teaser is marred. First, there are those ridiculous looking environmental suits. Since the hoods do not connect to the rest of the suits, they create no seal and therefore provide little protection. Next, Joe Tormelin, a trained officer picked to accompany Spock to investigate a strange occurrence at an isolated research station, lacks the sense to keep his gloves on, even when the room and all that he touches could be contaminated. Moments later, Spock tells Tormelin, "Be certain not to touch anything." Tormelin doesn't seem to get that he's already screwed up, and then Spock calls the ship, ending the teaser with the melodramatic line, "It's like nothing we've seen before." However, once the awkward start is out of the way, the naked time has nothing to apologize for. We hear a very loud ticking clock. The tension on the bridge and throughout the ship is unrelenting as the Enterprise spirals out of control toward a certain burn-up in the planet's atmosphere. Kirk is losing his command, and nothing he does seems to help. This is his present challenge, or greatest challenge and nightmare. His crew, losing the ability to reason, is abandoning him. Nurse Christine Chapel is seen here for the first time and confesses her hopeless love for Spock. She places her hand on his, and the disease is transferred. With Spock infected, Kirk loses his greatest asset. Under the influence of the disease, Spock confesses to his stunned captain, "My mother, I could never tell her that I loved her. An Earth woman living on a planet where love, emotion, is in bad taste." Of his relationship with Kirk, Spock says, "When I feel friendship for you, I am ashamed." Kirk crashes. He's been carrying the bug for a while, but was too driven to let it overpower him. Now it comes to the surface with his own confession. "Love, you're better off without it, Spock. And I'll be better off without mine. This vessel, I give, she takes. She won't permit me my life. I have to live hers. Now I know why it's called she." Darker still, Kirk speaks directly to the ship. I'll never lose you. Never. The Naked Time tells a story that would be difficult for a drama set contemporaneously in the 60s. A fantastic disease, something that can only exist in the future worlds of science fiction, is the catalyst for an examination of subdued emotions, inner conflict, obsessive ambition, and the loneliness of unanswered love. And now, this episode is written by John D.F. Black, although Roddenberry would do some rewriting, and directed by Mark Daniels, who had directed the previous episode, The Man Trap. John F. Black wrote the 1957 sci fi horror film The Unearthly. For TV, he was a regular contributor to many series, including Laredo, The Untouchables, and Mr. Novak. It was a script for Mr. Novak that won him a Writers Guild Award and led to Roddenberry pursuing him for Star Trek. With The Naked Time, Black saw the potential of the series' format and used the script to get the most out of the characters. He later said, "What I did purely and simply was take drunkenness and remove the slurs and staggers." As the story evolved from outline to script, the characters played a game of musical chairs. In Black's original outline and also his first try at the script, it is McCoy and Scott that accompany Spock to the frozen outpost, not Joe Tormelin. The three witness the results of the mayhem and return to the ship without incident. For this version, it's in the transporter room where we meet Tormelin, a member of the decontamination team. It is his job to collect the environmental suits. He's also wearing one, and it's here he gets the urge to scratch his nose and removes his glove, thereby contaminating himself. We get to the same end, but Joe Tormelin comes off a little less idiotic in this handling since his breach in procedure happens on the Enterprise and not in the frozen madhouse where horrific and unexplained events have occurred. Something else that's also very different in this version, Spock's breakdown happens in the ship's corridors in front of numerous crew members, with Rand calling out to the others, "Look, he's crying." And then the crying Spock is hurried away to sick bay where we see little of him until a cure is found. As he had done during the filming of The Enemy Within, with the invention of the Vulcan nerve pinch, Leonard Nimoy was again looking to help develop or perhaps protect his character. He told this author, "John Black and I had, I think, an unfortunate confrontation. On the Naked Time script, there was originally written that an elevator door opens up on one of the corridors and Spock is seen crying. And there's this guy going around with a paintbrush painting silly stuff on walls and so forth. And he comes up and he paints a funny mustache on Spock's face. And Spock just goes on crying." I said to John Black, "I think we're missing an opportunity here. If Spock can get into a private space, then he can let out some of his interior strife, and we might learn something touching and interesting about him." What I remember John saying was, "No, that would spoil the rhythm of the piece." Well, I thought strongly enough about it that I really did not want to do this painted face thing. So I went to Gene and I told him my idea. Then a little while later, John came to the set and said, "All right, tell me again what you have in mind." George Takei also wanted to have a hand in the development of his character. He recalled, "John Black was thinking of putting a samurai sword in Sulu's hands." I told John, "Sulu is a 23rd century guy. I'm a 20th century Asian American, and I didn't grow up brandishing a samurai sword. I was swept away by Errol Flynn and the adventures of Robin Hood. What about putting a fencing foil in Sulu's hand?" He said, "Great idea. Do you fence?" And I said, "It's my favorite hobby." I was lying, of course, but you never ask an actor whether he can do something because we're experts at everything. And if we aren't, that night we'll go out and become one. The one person Black expected to get notes from was Roddenberry, but Roddenberry chose to give his feedback in a different way, one which would damage his relationship with Black. He did a script rewrite. After only 2 months, John Black was becoming increasingly bothered watching Roddenberry overhaul material by renowned writers such as Derry Soule, Richard Matheson, George Clayton Johnson, and soon to come Robert Bloch, all of whom Black believed were better at writing than Roddenberry was. He said, I couldn't bear to see quality work change to the point where the dialogue did not have the sharp edge that it had. John Black said, my deal with Roddenberry, by the way, was that neither he nor I would touch a script until the writer had finished his first draft, his second draft, and his polish or her polish. When I delivered mine, my first draft on the Naked Time, there were two or three scripts that were in on that day, on Friday. I delivered it in to Gene on time, as I always did, and then went home. When I came back on Monday, I was told that Gene had rewritten me over the weekend. Uh, yeah, I was not gutless. I was ready for him, and I said, "What the hell have you done to my script?" And he said, "I made it better." Black told how he said, "For God's sake, Gene, I can maybe understand if for somebody who doesn't know the show, you would do this, but I'm the story executive. I work here. I know the show, and I know it." And Black remembered he just gave me this "that's the way it is" and "screw you" smile. Then he said he had a phone call he had to make to the network, and he had meetings with Lucille Ball or somebody. And he said we'd talk about it another time, but that time never came. Let's see here. Roddenberry put his imprint on the script before circulating it to cast, crew, studio, and the network. He later said that was a hell of a premise, but the script wasn't utilizing the characters to the degree that it could, taking full advantage of the inherent drama of seeing our people subjected to this condition. The rewriting took care of that, but I don't remember having a lot of time on that one. The script, as I recall, was very last minute. We needed the changes fast. I don't think any writer is completely receptive to being rewritten. I've been on the other side of it and can certainly understand. In John Black's final script polish, Spock's meltdown had been moved from the ship's corridor to the briefing room, but there is no big moment between him and Kirk, no slapping Spock, and no Spock backhanding Kirk and sending him reeling across the table. Nor does Kirk confess to loving the ship and understanding why it is called she. For the first time in the series, mention is made of the green ice water running through Spock's veins. Another change involved the role of Nurse Duchot, added to the script by Black to assist McCoy in sickbay and to be one of the many conduits for spreading the disease. Roddenberry changed the name to the not so subtle name of Christine Chapel and made much more of the character with clear intent of casting Majel Barrett in the role. With Star Trek falling behind schedule, the dates planned for the Naked Time now conflicted with the many other jobs that director Bernard Kowalski had committed to, as the director juggled assignments on The Monroes, Mission Impossible, and Gunsmoke. Frantic phone calls were made to, but no other director capable of taking on such a challenging show like Star Trek was available on such short notice. So Mark Daniels was tapped to direct back-to-back episodes. He had just directed the Man Trap before this one. I did two shows in a row once, Daniel said. It was craziness, but I did it. You usually get one day of preparation for every day you shoot, and you had to spend those 6 days in preparation trying to solve these problems. You couldn't wait until you got to the set, starting to shoot and say, oh, gee, how are we going to do this? Um, in an amazing feat, Daniels prepared the Naked Time while filming The Man Trap. Considering the anxiety the former script caused for some cast members, the calm and encouraging Daniels was the perfect choice. Bruce Hyde, in the role of Kevin Riley, was 24. He had been appearing before the camera for only a year, with a guest spot on The Trials of O'Brien and a minor brief recurring role in a few episodes of Dr. Kildare. Desilu had cast Hyde in a pilot film called Dilby and wanted to keep him close by in case the series was picked up. Star Trek casting director Joe Agosta was asked to find Hyde work, and Mark Daniels approved of him. Bruce Hyde recalled, I had worked with Mark a year or so previously in a summer tour of a play called Linda Stone is Brutal. We had a great time with that tour, and Mark was very much a father figure to the young people in the cast. I loved Mark, and having him as the director was a gift. Hyde would return for a prominent role in The Conscience of the King a few episodes down the line, but the naked time with his rendition of I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen is Bruce Hyde's shining moment. As for the song, even though it is revered as an Irish ballad, it was actually written in America by an American named Thomas P. Westendorf. Being 91 years old at that point, the song was in the public domain. Stuart Moss, at 28, was cast as Joe Tourmalin, the careless crewman with the itchy nose. With a background on stage, Moss had been working in TV for a few years with guest spots on Perry Mason, 12 O'Clock High, and multiple episodes of Hogan's Heroes. Moss said Joe DaGosta was a personal friend. He called me and told me he was casting a new sci fi series, which hadn't aired yet, and there was a part in an upcoming show that I was right for. He mentioned the cast, and I was a big sci fi fan at the time. I had read everything that Heinlein and Sturgeon and Asimov had written, so I said yes. As for familiar faces, the ever present Eddie Paskey takes over the helm when Sulu abandons it. Frank Da Vinci takes over the navigation station after Riley exits, and Ron Vito helps a recovered Sulu from his bed in sickbay. Now, on the second day of filming, the company began working on Stage 10 filming the episode's teaser on the observation station set. Nimoy and Moss were the only actors needed. Moss recalled, I questioned Mark Daniels about a Starfleet officer who probably had a PhD in engineering and whether he would be stupid enough to take off his glove in that situation. Daniels said, of course not, but if you don't do it, we don't have a show. The next scene, so then on day 4, they filmed the scene featuring Sulu charging onto the bridge with a fencing foil. Ed Paskey, sitting in Sulu's seat at the helm during the scene, said, rehearsal was just great, no problems. But when the director called action, George came out of that damn elevator like he was shot from a cannon and started wielding that sword. And Bill backs away and says, Jesus Christ, George, you're going to kill me with that damn thing. Mark Daniels said, I really physically had to restrain him. He got so excited that I was scared he was going to stab somebody. Not purposefully, but he was getting too close. I took the sword from Way and had the end of it dulled down. Shatner also had an opinion about and a memento from that performance. Quote, he said, George had always had a sword fighting fantasy. In shooting this sequence, I saw his dream about to come true. He attacked the scene and me with such gusto that I have a very small scar to prove what a wonderful swordsman he was. For his part, Takei denied that he was behaving in anything other than a professional way. What Daniels, Paskey, and Shatner and the others saw, according to him, was his commitment to character. Okay, and also there's a little bit about that on Wikipedia that I found. Um, so on Wikipedia, it says that when not needed on the set, Takei would practice fencing, frequently lunging it, passing members of the film crew, and sometimes poking them. A delegation eventually called on Gene Roddenberry and threatened that the entire crew would quit if Sulu was ever given a sword again. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into the episode itself. So we begin with the Enterprise in orbit of Psi 2000, an ancient world that is about to be destroyed by natural forces. Spock and Lieutenant Tourmalin beam down to a research station and find the research team that appears to have died under bizarre circumstances, some having frozen to death, others seeming to have been murdered. They're both wearing protective suits, so of course Tourmaline removes his glove just long enough to become contaminated by a foreign substance of some sort. And then, of course, literally right after that, Spock reminds him not to expose himself to anything. Then Spock calls the Enterprise and informs Kirk it's like nothing we've ever seen before. Now, on the Enterprise, Spock and Tourmaline undergo decontamination after beaming up, and then they are examined by McCoy, who finds nothing unusual. But Tourmaline is already infected and starting to behave oddly. He's upset about the state they found the research team in, all being dead, and questions whether humanity was meant to explore out into the depths of space. Kirk subsequently holds a staff meeting where they examine the evidence from the research station, and Kirk asks for theories on what might have happened to make them die under such strange circumstances and whether it could pose a danger to the ship. McCoy notes that he found no evidence of any drugs or intoxicants in their system, and Spock speculates that it might have been some new form of space madness. Spock notes that they will need to observe the breakup of the planet by maintaining a tight orbit that will require a high degree of precision from the crew due to fluctuations in gravity and the planet's shifting magnetic field. In the mess hall, Tourmaline is already showing signs of being affected. He is approached by Sulu and Riley, but Tourmaline begins acting irrationally, lamenting that humans should never have ventured into space, and then attempts to, well, first he threatens them with a knife, a butter knife, and then threatens to kill himself. I assume that he wasn't given a proper knife because it was probably, a network censor thing where they didn't want to show that kind of violence in the 60s. That would be my guess. So Tourmaline tries to end himself, and Sulu and Riley wrestle with him. They fall to the floor, and the other people in the mess hall are just sitting there watching. It's like what are they doing? Showing no interest. And interesting. Now we know about 3D chess, but here we see 3D checkers, which is kind of interesting. Anyway, they fall to the floor, and Tourmaline is stabbed in the abdomen. Riley calls for medical help, but then we realize that he is infected as well. On the bridge, Spock informs Kirk that the planet's breakup is proceeding more swiftly than expected. And then we realize that Spock is infected, or not Spock, but Sulu is infected as well. In sick bay, Tourmaline dies despite McCoy's best efforts to save him. Afterwards, he meets with Kirk and laments that Tourmaline's injuries weren't that severe and suggests that it just seems as if Tourmaline just gave up and chose to die. Now, on the bridge, Sulu abruptly leaves, suggesting that he needs a workout. Back in sick bay, Kirk questions if what happened on the planet has now spread to the ship, and McCoy says that Tourmaline underwent decontamination and nothing unusual was found. On the bridge, an alarm starts going off as the gravity continues to increase, and Spock demands to know where Sulu is. Riley begins to act bizarrely, and Spock orders him to go to sickbay. Now, in sickbay, Riley learns that Tourmaline has died. He also touches Chapel's face, infecting her, and then he leaves. Meanwhile, Sulu begins roaming the halls, menacing the crew with a rapier, and of course, one of Star Trek's most famous scenes, babbling as if he were a character in The Three Musketeers. On the bridge, Spock tells Kirk about Riley and Sulu's absence, and Kirk orders them both confined by security and that everyone they've come in contact with needs to be checked out by the medical staff. Then Uhura reports that Sulu has been chasing crewmen through the halls with a sword. The ship is then rocked as the gravity intensifies again, and the ship is unable to compensate. Kirk orders the ship to warp away from the planet, but the controls aren't responding. Then Sulu arrives on the bridge, and there's a brief tussle until Spock uses the nerve pinch to subdue him. They then contact engineering to find out why the controls won't respond, and Riley informs them that Scotty has been relieved, and he now controls engineering and the ship, and begins issuing absurd orders such as increased portions of ice cream for the crew. And then he begins to serenade the ship with a rendition of "I'll Take You Home Again, Kathleen." Spock warns that they only have 20 minutes before the ship hits the atmosphere, and at this point, he's probably wondering, why did I ever choose to work with humans? Scotty tells Kirk that Riley lured him. Oh, I'm sorry. I need to move to the next one here. Here we go. Scotty tells Kirk that Riley has lured him out of engineering and locked the doors. He plans to cut through the bulkhead to open the door, but they may not have time for that. On the bridge, Uhura reports increasing incidences of violence and strange behavior among the crew. Meanwhile, the gravity continues to pull the ship down, but Riley now controls everything. Scotty does manage to rig an override, allowing them to get partial helm control back and at least slowed their descent down. Spock moves through the ship, encountering various crewmen acting out. He tells Scotty to hurry up. Oh, yeah, we get the scene where this guy's harassing Rand. Spock tells him to go away, then leaves, and of course the guy immediately starts up again. Feel You got to feel for Rand because she was basically, assaulted in the previous episode by the evil Kirk, and now here she's getting harassed again by this crewman. He tells Scotty he needs to hurry up on cutting throughs. Scotty says he is going as fast as he can. On the bridge, the situation continues to deteriorate. More crewmen are being incapacitated by the infection as the ship continues to fall into the planet's atmosphere. Spock arrives at sickbay where Chapel confesses her love for him, and of course, she touches him and infects him. He apologizes to her for being unable to love her back, I would assume, and he leaves. Scotty finally gets access to engineering, and Kirk has Riley removed. The infection seems to have a particularly strong effect on Spock, who begins to have an emotional breakdown, and he hides in the briefing room so that no one will see him. And of course, this is a very important episode for Spock because it's really the first episode where you get any real kind of look into who he is, and of course the emotions that he normally keeps bottled up. Some of the scenes we have in this episode, they really define Spock's character going forward. Now the ship starts entering the atmosphere, and Scotty tells Kirk that Riley has actually shut the engines off and it will require at least 30 minutes to restart them. In sickbay, McCoy has discovered the infection is caused by water that has somehow been altered by this planet and acts similarly to alcohol on the body. He tests a serum on Sulu and it works. So then he calls the lab and orders them to produce more. But of course, the people in the lab are acting strangely. So he departs to go make more of the serum himself so he can begin inoculating the crew. Kirk finds Spock in the briefing room and tells him they're going to have to perform a cold start of the engines, which will risk destroying the ship. But Spock is no help here. He's such a mess. He laments his relationships with his father and his mother, how cold and emotionless they were. He admits that he feels shame for his friendship with Kirk. Kirk tries to get Spock to focus on the problem with the engines, saying they need a formula to restart the engines cold, but Spock dismisses the idea, noting that it's never been done. Spock or Kirk literally tries to slap some sense into Spock, who then knocks him silly. Then Kirk realizes he's been infected as well. And we get a nice scene from Kirk here as he laments his dedication to his ship, how it doesn't allow him to live a full life, only what duty demands, and admits his attraction to Yeoman Rand as well, and that he'd like to be free of his demands, the demands that command places on him, at least for a little while. He then goes to the bridge. Well, first, Scotty arrives. And I don't know, it seems like the shock of seeing Kirk breaking down almost brings Spock out of it because he starts to kind of come around and starts reasoning. And Spock orders them to go to sickbay to get the engines working. He goes to the bridge, and we get this rather amusing scene. He exits the elevator, and McCoy rips his shirt open and injects him. Why does he need to do that? I mean, he injects people through their uniforms plenty of times. So does he really need to do that? Anyway, Kirk orders them to restart the engines, and it works. But then they discover that they are traveling backwards in time. And eventually they realize that they have gone about 3 days into the past. Spock notes that this opens up the prospect of exploring in time as well as in space. And Kirk notes that they may risk doing that someday. Yeah, no kidding, considering how many episodes of Star Trek revolve around time travel. So yeah, just another classic episode. So many of these early episodes are just great, and some of the defining episodes of the series, really. And this is an episode that's been like the Enemy Within before it, an episode that's been imitated and referenced many times over the years. Again, there's some information about that on Wikipedia. The events of this episode are repeated in Star Trek The Next Generation, in the episode The Naked Now, where Riker references the incident as in universe history. And those events are also mentioned again in the season 6 episode Relics. The 2009 Star Trek film makes a reference to the scene where Sulu acts like a swashbuckler when Kirk asks Sulu what type of combat training he's had, and he replies, fencing. Footage from this episode appears in the 2014 film X-Men Days of Future Past. I don't remember that. I don't remember it being in there. I'll have to look at that. And a reference to this episode is made in the Hollywood Nights episode of Scooby-Doo and Guess Who? Huh, I didn't know that either. Okay. Bring this back up. And this is also, it sets a template because it's one of many episodes that sets kind of a precedent where, you've got a plot where there's some strange unknown force that is acting upon the crew and altering their behavior or incapacitating them. And, the remaining crew members need to solve this problem, find out what's causing it, and then find a solution. Now, according to Mark Cushman's book, when this episode aired first on Thursday, September 29th in 1966, it won its time slot. It got a 34.1% audience share, narrowly beating out My Three Sons for the first half hour. And then in the second half hour, it again won its slot with a 30.7% share, just barely beating out the CBS Thursday Night Movie, which had a 30.3% share, and Bewitched, which had a 29.2% share. Immediately following the broadcast of The Naked Time, Leonard Nimoy knew that this episode had an enormous effect on both the show's popularity and Spock's appeal. In 1968, he told a reporter, quote, "Within 2 weeks after that show, my mail jumped from a few hundred letters to 10,000 a week. The scene got to a lot of people, and I knew what I had to play in the scripts that followed. It solidified everything. I knew that we were not playing a man with no emotions, but a man who had great pride, who had learned to control his emotions, who would deny that he had what emotions he had. In a way, he was more human than anyone else on the ship." Bruce Hyde recalled, "It was a strange experience being one of the first times I'd seen myself on film. At this point, most of my experience was on stage, so the Star Trek episodes were almost the first things I'd done that were actually going to be televised. This prospect would have excited me regardless of the role. It also scared me because of my inexperience. I think what seemed unusual was the whole idea of doing sci fi on TV. At this point, TV sci fi had been confined mostly to children's shows, so it wasn't a genre into which adult TV had ventured much." Stuart Moss said, quote, "A few days after The Naked Time aired, I got a note in the mail from the writer John Black thanking me for making him look good. That was a first and a last for me. I was worried about my performance because I had some dialogue that was a little bit much. I had asked Mark to make sure I didn't get too big. He assured me that I was believable. Yet the note from John was very much appreciated." John Black said, quote, "Stewart was marvelous. He's a fine actor. He was, and I think always stayed that way. He certainly deserved a note from me. An actor like that deserves a lot of notes and praise. He gave that role everything he had and everything it needed." Grace Lee Whitney remembered the excitement both in making Star Trek and in watching it. She said, quote, "If you could have seen us, when we saw the dailies after those first few shoots, I was blown away. I couldn't imagine that we were so good together. All of us were so good together, the cast and the crew. That's what made the show, the interaction between the crew and the actors, the chemistry. It was rolling, let me tell you." Roddenberry said, "That was an important show and another way of establishing who our people are. We had Jerry's story, the Corbomite maneuver, how people reveal certain things about themselves when under pressure. They also do that when under the influence. So a device like that, it's a good way to strip away a lot of things and show who is really in there. And much of that, what we were able to do there comes back. What we learned about our captain and Spock and some of the others, it's now part of the series. You don't lose sight of those character traits as you move forward." The Naked Time almost gave us double the nakedness. It was actually intended to be a two-part episode. As presented up till the final few minutes, we see part one. Part two was supposed to deal with the Enterprise traveling back in time. That chapter of the story would later be rewritten into the episode Tomorrow is Yesterday. This episode worked so well, in fact, that Roddenberry wanted to do a sequel. A treatment was written in May of 1967 before the start of the second season. That it was put aside for 20 years, eventually becoming The Naked Now for Star Trek The Next Generation. George Takei named The Naked Time his favorite Star Trek episode. Gene Roddenberry put it on a list of his top 10. William Shatner considered it to be one terrific episode as well. The sci-fi community agree, and this episode was nominated for a Hugo Award in 1967. The category was Best Filmed Science Fiction. This was the second Star Trek episode from season one to receive a nomination, the other being the Corbomite maneuver. And there would be a third, and I'm assuming that was probably City on the Edge of Forever, I believe. All right. Well, I think that is going to wrap it up for this episode. Again, another. Oh, and I'll give this episode definitely an A plus. There, this is one of the absolute best episodes of the series. Aside from the kind of clunky beginning, this episode doesn't really have any flaws that I can think of. I mean, it's just great. Not to mention being one of the most enjoyable. So that'll wrap it up for me. If you do view the stream, please do like the stream and also please do sub to the channel. And if you would check out some of my other videos while you're here, I'll probably be back next week to do another episode. What is the next one? Let me see here. Oh, Charlie X. That's going to be next week. All right. So until then, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next week. Good night.